sadly this year, like a lot of us are in that same conundrum of like, oh shit, I can't actually charge more for coffee yet because it's too fast and my consumers aren't ready. I'm going to have to pivot. I'm going to find some other solution. I'm going to do something in the short term. And so, because we haven't really committed on this consuming side to saying specialty coffee should never have been as cheap as it was, we never should have tried to compete with conventional coffee. Now we're sitting here being like, conventional coffee is eating our lunch because we're not ready to tell our consumers
Yeah.
from our scale of production with our cost of productions that it takes to roast your coffee and pack it on an SME size versus a massive company. We can't absorb those losses. They're immediate. They come really quickly. They come within 6 to 8 months as opposed to being stretched out over 2, 3 years, right? We're not Lavazza, right? We're not Illy. We're these small businesses that are immediately going to have to pass that price down to you. But then are your consumers ready for a 40% price hike because you were running it at a price to stay competitive with like local conventional brands or with the supermarket brands? Probably not.
Is your coffee business ready for the next stage of growth? Grow Your Coffee Business is our most popular mastermind group, and a new group is starting in August. This 3-month online program is for coffee producers, roasters, and cafe owners ready to expand, evolve, and adapt. We'll meet every second week for 2 hours and work on understanding your numbers, managing risks, setting realistic goals, and using ChatGPT to grow smarter, not just bigger. Join a supportive group of like-minded business owners and build your plan for 2025 and 26. Apply now at mapleforward.coffee/group coaching or click the link in the show notes. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is unfortunately the final episode of this series with Brendan Adams from Semilla Coffee in Canada. Folks, I say this a few times a year and I never know when I'm going to say it, but there are some series that I wish I wasn't the host. I wish that I was hearing this conversation for the first time, driving in my car or, dialing in the espresso machines in the morning, so that this conversation would be something that fed my thinking for the rest of the day. So Brendan, I really want to thank you for an extraordinary conversation. It's been really eye-opening. And I know for sure there are people out there that are going to be reassessing the way that they participate in the coffee supply chain after this conversation. So thank you for a really great conversation.
Thank you so much. It means a lot, truly.
You're welcome.
But no, I hope that whoever is reassessing their thoughts does so in a way where they have a lot of kindness for themselves, because I think at the end of the day, we're all just learning, and this is all just about how do we make a fundamentally flawed system better, and it's going to mean a lot of mistakes, right? So,
yeah. Well, and that leads us into this question that we're asking in this episode. The series is, can we actually make coffee better? But this episode is the future of coffee guaranteed? And there are a lot of people in our industry right now who have said, whether they're a producer or whether they're a roaster or a cafe owner, whatever it is, and they've said, I decided to do specialty coffee because I wanted to be somebody who made coffee better. And specialty coffee did not deliver on the promise that was made. And now I may lose everything. And we've talked about consolidation in this series. And as we look at what's happening to our industry at the moment, there are a lot of people who, had it not have been for matcha, had it not have been for signature drinks, they would be out of business by now already.
right.
And so what they're saying is that the market has offered them the opportunity to care a little less about coffee and take on board other revenue streams that are going to enable their business to survive. And so this is just the reality of what it is to do business this year. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think something that's really interesting with matcha taking all this heat in this space, just as a side note, I guess, before getting into it really about coffee, is that matcha's suffering a lot of the same problems that coffee does. I think that there's
it's about to do exactly what coffee's
exactly
doing.
right. So I think obviously tea is really interesting because so many tea producers are so empowered, largely due to like a domestic consuming market, which means that they don't struggle. Just when we talk about with Mexico, with a group of people in Mexico, you find a domestic market that pays you well, and suddenly you can demand a much higher external price. And so this has happened with tea, and that's like, amazing. But overconsumption or increased consumption of a product that is an agricultural product that is susceptible to climate change is fundamentally very similar to coffee, right? It's a very similar dynamic. So I think that in the short term, it's great that Matcha's throwing a lifeline to people, but it holds similar supply chain issues that are going to require us to have a similar consciousness about it. And I think this is the thing with coffee that's so fascinating about it is that especially coffee really should be this way, and coffee in general should be this sort of inspiration towards you just critically thinking about all global supply, right? Because that's
Mm.
fundamentally where there are times when we think about where like our clothes come from or where our bananas come from, but it doesn't really make the same kind of news. I mean, I think you can look at bananas right now, like there's been a massive Chiquita banana strike, incredible repression in Panama on the people producing Chiquita bananas and people processing the bananas through the ports in Panama. But like that hasn't got nearly as much response as like the price of coffee increasing, right? But bananas are obviously going to
Mm.
go up. So I think in general, what's always exciting about coffee is that um, it can be a scenario to support understanding about supply chains in general and for us to think more critically about all those things. In terms of like it being guaranteed, I think it's a fight. Like we said before, I think that it's a true fight to be in a scenario to see it continue as we want it to continue. I think the way that I want to see it continue is that the 70 to 80% of all the smallholders or all the coffee that's produced in the world comes from smallholders. And I want to see that 78% of those people continue to thrive. And well, most of them don't thrive now, but a world in which
Mm-hmm.
they can be prioritized and thriving and that they don't have the one trade and income that has connected to them to their land and their community ripped away from them because no one wanted to pay more for coffee or no one wanted to deal with the fact that climate change was affecting these places. Um, but I think that fundamentally that isn't under threat, and it is going to take like serious collaborative collective effort between not only like buyers and producers, but also there's going to have to be like a larger intergovernmental effort that identifies this, right? Like there's going to have to be public support and public funds, some sort of structuring that goes into this, because the reality is that individual businesses can't support and face these challenges alone, right? And so I think that that's the fundamental thing that we have to consider is that the notion that like again this firm-led sustainability and specialty that was going to save things by each individual company acting in their own like best interest with good intentions, that this was going to again have this trickle down effect where everything was left in a hunky-dory scenario and we moved on with our lives. That's just not happening, and it's going to require us to have some sort of
No.
collective solution, right, where brands are going to have to recognize that I've thought a lot about this in terms of like unions. Like we almost need to unionize as buyers to say like these are the standards of how we buy, and this is what are the rules of how we buy coffee in terms of not downstream rules of setting standards on producers, but upstream rules setting standards on ourselves. What is the ceiling or what is the floor that we're willing to sell roasted specialty coffee for? What is the floor of the price that we're willing to pay for specialty coffee? So we have these like efforts. The specialty coffee transaction guide, I think, is a really good example. Things like this that are trying to like coalesce more information that is coming from multiple sources to create a better objective reference of how we can do things. But we have to double down on those efforts because it won't continue the way that it is. Because we've touched on already, the conventional system is one thing. Even if it pays you more money right now, I think it's a big thing people need to dispel. And I'm sure you've talked about many times this year. Higher price
Mm-hmm.
does not mean higher profitability. That's not what's happening. You know,
At all.
Good example is pickers. As soon as pickers know that the price of coffee goes up, you think the pickers take the same amount of money that they took last year? Absolutely
No.
not. They
Or the
take way
fertilizer
more.
companies.
Fertilizer companies jacking
Mm-hmm.
up the price, whatever it is, there's always some way in which this will be manipulated so that the price goes up relative to it. So it's not to say that producers are making no money this year. I think many are doing well, but like interest rates are high in these producing countries. Another thing people don't recognize, like to find an interest rate under 18% annual is very good in a producing country, and to run a farm,
Mm.
producers need to take on loans a lot of the time, right? So like sometimes people are paying 3% a month, 24% annual to run like a small farm. Like
Mm.
these things don't go down, right? So just because the price of coffee goes up on a conventional market, we're not saved. It doesn't make things are better now because it's not consistent and it doesn't track to like actual cost. And then secondly, within specialty, many of us have hit a ceiling. Sadly, this year, like a lot of us are in that same conundrum of like, oh shit, I can't actually charge more for coffee yet because it's too fast and my consumers aren't ready. I'm going to have to pivot. I'm going to find some other solution. I'm going to do something in the short term. And so, because we haven't really committed on this consuming side to saying specialty coffee should never have been as cheap as it was, we never should have tried to compete with conventional coffee. Now we're sitting here being like, conventional coffee is eating our lunch because we're not ready to tell our consumers
Yeah.
from our scale of production with our cost of productions that it takes to roast your coffee and pack it on an SME size versus a massive company. We can't absorb those losses. They're immediate. They come really quickly. They come within 6 to 8 months as opposed to being stretched out over 2, 3 years, right? We're not Lavazza, right? We're not Illy. We're these small businesses that are immediately going to have to pass that price down to you. But then are your consumers ready for a 40% price hike because you are running it at a price to stay competitive with like local conventional brands or with the supermarket brands? Probably not, right? So there's all of these host of issues that come down to the fact that, like we talked about with everything, if you don't get to the truth of how this works and thinks theoretically about how the system as it is right now was built to fundamentally dispossess value in order to aggregate value in the core, and that system is eroding rapidly and cannot be was never good to begin with, but now is not something you should bet on if you're not willing to really reassess how you can redefine your value proposition from a pricing way all the way through down to like how you support producers, how you source coffee. um, it's not guaranteed at all, you know. And I think that we'll see how much attrition there
No.
is among small roasters or medium roasters, or even some of the bigger roasters or importers or anybody on the supply chain, right? That will go down because they can't maintain the liquidity demand, they can't handle the risk of increased coffee that they can't sell, increased price coffee they can't sell, et cetera, right? So I think it's a really complex web, but it starts fundamentally with like something we say within Semilla: follow truth. Find the truth of what you're trying to
Oh,
achieve
I like that.
and find the truth of what is happening at the origin and the people you support and follow it and share it and make sure that people understand it who support you, who consume things that you produce, and go forward with that mentality, and I think it'll be okay. But if you're just in this like set it and forget it, I buy coffee, I turn it brown, I sell it, I compete with the guy beside me, I try to undercut it, I don't see how that's going to work.
I want to put into frame the conversation around tariffs, like the real life truth of what's about to happen. We're, as I said, we're recording this on the 29th of July. The US tariffs come in on the 2nd of August.
Mm-hmm.
We have no idea if that's going to happen, but there is a very real, sobering reality that comes with that on a global level, especially when you partner it with the fact that later this year, EUDR is going to kick in. So, to put things in context, we were saying when the pricing part of the coffee crisis was a focus, that the big companies forward contract so much that they will probably be able to weather this situation better than everybody else, right? But America being the number one consumer of coffee in the world, what it means when you add 10% tariffs onto coffee is that the people who are bringing the coffee into the country have to now find in a year where coffee costs at least double what it cost last year, they have to find not only the double of that, they have to now find immediately an extra 10%. That's for like across the board tariffs. That unto itself is hard. But when you look at the fact that Brazil is the number one coffee that's brought into the United States, and the tariff on that is 50%. The corporations who were expecting that they would be able to weather this price crisis better than everybody else, they are now in a position where there is no amount of absorption that's going to help them to avoid the reality of this moment. And 50% tariffs are debilitating.
Oh yeah.
No matter how big you are.
For sure. Yeah, I think that like
Do you think?
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, I think that the back-to-back nature of this is the thing to think about, right? Like as we talked about
It's
before,
brutal.
the fact that the price spiked and then people were like reluctant to buy, and then now the you have this tariff, which effectively now the market's gone down, but with a 50% tariff on Brazil, you're effectively pushed back up to what? Like, if market, I don't know what the market is today, but it was $3 last week. So 450,
It's
you're talking,
303. Yeah, before I checked.
so 50% tariff, obviously with basic math, 450, what you're paying for
Yeah.
Brazilian blenders or Brazilian milds or whatever it is you're trying to grab, pulp natural, whatever it is. Um, that's a ton of money. That's that's a high altitude mild from the Americas last year. Like that's how quick that changed. And like
Yeah.
none of those companies were buying those coffees for that. And those coffees from Central America, that harvest is clearly now closed. But that coffee did not come to market because a lot of it went to conventional markets. It didn't come to like a lot of the smaller businesses are on spot. It got consumed by massive companies, right? It got consumed by the big boys who knew that they needed to get their 70 container order in you know September, October, and like locked a price and did okay on it. But now you're just not going to find that volume to replace that either, right? So either you're looking
Mm.
down the barrel of paying a lot more for that coffee and trying to figure out how you're going to manage that, which like tough, very tough when you look at that for sure. But then also the volume, you're just not going to replace it. So I think it's a sort of a perfect storm right now. And I mean, I think it's possible that it gets drawn back. I think, though, based on the way that it's been happening with the European Union and what is happening now with Canada, like it's pretty obvious that there'd be tariffs on everything. Like every country is going to pay a tariff.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. If the European Union, who is a willing partner, gets 15%, they've currently applied 35 on Canada, and we haven't negotiated anything down on that yet. Brazil, who is effectively like a hostile actor in the view of the Trump administration, I don't see a reality in which he's trying to bring that down to zero ever. But even if he brings it down to 15%, I think that would be like a very lucky
Mm.
scenario if Brazilian coffee tariffs end up at, or Brazilian tariffs in general end up at 15%, because it's a personal vendetta thing, right? It's not about economics.
It's
So
about Bolsonaro.
I think,
Yeah, that's exactly right.
and I think it also comes down to the fact that I think it reflects what we talked about in terms of like the need for us to really stop looking at coffee in the sense of like fractioned businesses that are being like, I'm doing my thing and I'll just get this for this and I'll compete against other people. Like this free market usage, when we get into this scenario, we realize that like, so the market was never free. It just takes one actor deciding that it costs you more and we're all just going to have to like scramble around and try to figure that out. But I think that
Yeah.
fundamentally, it also implies the fact that the anemia of like the American like associations that would actually advocate to change anything, like the SCA, effectively won't do anything. The SCA does not involve itself in political
They're
causes.
irrelevant at this
So
point.
they're irrelevant, of course, but they're making themselves even more irrelevant because they literally, it's part of their constitution that they literally will not and cannot engage on the behalf of their members to make any sort of effort or appeal to the government to stop this, which is just insanity that people pay them money and then they can't do anything for you. So you have the National Coffee Association that's trying to do something, but most of the specialty coffee actors and most of the mainstream coffee players, they don't actually engage with the NCA. The NCA is sort of like a out of fashion
A
sort of
marketing company.
organization and a marketing company. Yeah. So it's like there is no tool, there is no advocacy organization for the
No.
industry, right? And I think this gets into the whole touch point of everything we're talking about is that if we don't create some sort of intergovernmental, you know, interbusiness scenario where we have like some sort of board or some sort of organization, a cooperative, let's say, that's trying to actually advocate for real change, whether it's trying to affect supply and make sure that producers get paid properly and there's none of this extractive models that are happening or limiting them and trying to have rules around that, or just fundamentally in self-preservation so that you actually have a vehicle to advocate for yourself against an administration that wants to arbitrarily put massive tariffs on products that will fundamentally affect all American consumers. This whole free market scenario just falls apart because we're just individual people trying to like,
Yeah.
scream into the void to get paid attention to. And it's not going to work. None there is. You can maybe get
No.
hopes that some of these bigger businesses, but take the auto tariffs as an example. Auto companies came to Trump with the Canada United States tariffs because almost every car in America has some component built in Canada, right? Like it
Yep.
doesn't matter. The cross-border cooperation between Detroit and Windsor, for example, is massive. And Trump's response was like, I'll give you a little break, but like build your factory in America. I don't give a shit. So like there is
This
no
guy, man.
scenario in terms of like him sitting here being like, I'm going to go easy on you because an industry player like Dunkin' Donuts or whoever comes forward and says, look, you're
No,
really
no, no.
hurting us. That won't matter to him because he'll just be like, too bad, you know? On my
And
non-serious
it's
take
not as
about
if
it
the
is,
money's going to go.
yeah, go ahead.
It's not as if the money ends up going to farmers. This is a 50% increase that's going straight into the government's pockets.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't in any way help our industry. It doesn't in any way
No,
go directly back into confirming the long-term viability of our industry. If anything, it does the complete
that's the
opposite.
complete
It
opposite.
turns around and
Mhm.
makes people think,
Coffee costs too much
I
money and
can't
I'm not going to do it.
participate.
It's a dalliance. And you see it in Canada already too, right? Like you can see, even because like so much of the coffee in Canada comes through the States, and then you have coffee landing in the States and then coming through. So a lot of Canadian roasters are paying tariffs. Many of them are trying to avoid it. But even before that, which is the price spike affecting things, major Canadian retailers, like major Canadian supermarkets, have rejected brands like Folgers from their shelves because the price hike was too high. They refused to accept it. So it's like you can see already how there's like a consumer, and you can hear it. You know, consumers are starting to be like, "Well, I'm just not going to buy coffee anymore." Um,
Yeah.
that's a serious reality in America, and I think something in America that people don't like. I was sort of new to, but the majority of American economy is consumption. It's consumer goods and retail. Like that's
Yeah.
almost all of America's
Yeah.
economy. So when you take away something like coffee, which is how much coffee is consumed on a daily basis, like it's not just that people will stop buying it, it's like also just like a massive economic hit, like, death by a thousand cuts type scenario. So, and it's fundamentally just funding in a tax break. Not is it not going to the coffee industry, it's funding into his tax break for the rich because he's using this tariff now to
Yeah.
cut income tax on the
Completely.
rich so that he can therefore have a tax base still. This is his theory, right? Is that tariffs will allow us to have lower income tax on the wealthy. So he's literally just trying to recreate a robber baron era where the local consumer pays high taxes on everything so that they don't have to pay as much on their income tax. So it's
Mm,
across a lot of levels. It's really something that is should be considered deeply offensive, I think, let alone scary, because he's just
I agree.
coming for the American consumer and the American small business for sure, let alone, all the other industries that are affected.
Have you heard of Klarna?
Yeah.
Do you know what Klarna is?
Yeah.
Yeah, for those who don't know, it's the buy now, pay later scheme. It's one of those systems, like Afterpay
Mhm.
and Tabby and things like that. Do you know what the majority of the debt in America in Klarna is being used for right now?
No idea.
Take a guess.
I don't know. Groceries, maybe?
It is.
Yeah.
It's groceries.
Yeah. No, I mean,
That should fucking terrify everybody.
mhm. Yeah, people can't afford their money.
People are not using Klarna to buy cameras or,
No.
exercise equipment or
Yeah.
something that's fun, right?
They're daily
They're using
goods.
it to pay for fundamental basics.
Yeah.
That is an indicator that everybody should be paying attention to.
Yeah, and
Everybody around the world should be paying attention to
100%.
that.
I think fundamentally, like to tie this whole conversation together, I think that's something that's like really important for us to recognize is that the global coffee supply system is just part of a larger globalized uh, worldview, right? And we can look through the G7 nations, which were supposed to be the benefactors of this system. And almost every single one of those G7 nations has a whopping GDP to debt ratio, like an absurd
Oh,
GDP.
massive.
Japan being the worst, but Canada is up there. We are running massive levels of debt to survive. And so we need to really consider how much of this system that is disenfranchising small producers and the coffee system is actually the same system that is putting us all in debt as well, right? So it isn't really just a thing of
Mhm.
us versus them. We're sitting here getting rich. Yes, we aggregate more value, but how much does that matter when our rent is through the roof? Our mortgage payments are through the roof. Our car payments are through the roof. You have to finance your groceries. Everything that you pay for comes with an interest fee, basically. And so once you're into that scenario,
Mm.
there becomes a thing where I said before about how coffee can be this sort of like, I like to say canary in the coal mine, I guess, right? Maybe that's a little bit dark, but
Right.
it's this harbinger of what's to come. I think that it's a really good indicator of how these globalized supply
Totally.
systems that were built for what reason? They were built on the notion that you could export your labor need to a global south country where the cost of production was lower, therefore get a cheaper good and have a higher quality of life. That was the basic premise of globalization in the 90s. That was NAFTA. That was the whole idea.
Except it's led to a house of
Of
cards.
course, and that's the point, is that it hasn't functioned. Even the number one like leading scholars of this, like Francis Fukuyama, who declared the end of history in the 90s, right? That we'd arrived in that position. He, he even now says like, you know what, like I did think that, but like we were wrong. Like it didn't work the way we thought it was going to
Yeah.
work, right? And so I
No.
think that this whole thing just brings us into this position of recognizing that like we're not in a scenario of like you're a bad global north white person who buys coffee and dispossesses brown people. This is identity politics that doesn't help us at the end of the day. What does matter is
Mm.
addressing structural inequality that is affecting all of us on a global level, right? And coffee is a huge part of that because it's a massive global supply system with massive multinational actors who have no accountability, who can do whatever they need to do to like pull the levers and the gears in order to get what they need out of it. And now it's being exploited and manipulated by a global investor class who sees it as something
Speculators.
that they can speculate on to make short-term
Exactly.
cash. And so, like, time to get your head out of the sand and just say, I buy fancy coffee and I sell it for more and I do good in the world. It's time for like a structural analysis of how we all play into this system and recognize that we're all in solidarity across the board as like people who are trying to see a horizon and a reality in which it makes sense for them to feed their families and pay their bills and do a good thing in the world. And I don't think that's impossible, but it means not accepting the system as it is and trying to find something way to build something new.
You are far more optimistic than I am, my friend.
I think that
Far
optimism, like, I think
more
that this is,
optimistic.
yeah. I think though, I just say that I think it's really important. Like, I think that like something that I like a lot of, I think we talked about this before and something that the people who inspire me the most against like global South coffee professionals have been the people who have taught me the most. But so much of the people who
Hmm.
inspired me to keep going in my life are black feminists and the black feminist movement, right? And I think that like
Mm.
something we really need to steer away from is like the pessimism that is inherent in like a privileged global north like white society that fundamentally just wants to say like we're done here, this is ruined, we can't fix it. That is part of the power structure, right? This notion that we don't have agency to make things different. I'm not sitting here saying that we're
Yeah.
going to get together and tomorrow it's going to fix that. I don't believe that at all. But the notion that we would stop trying because we don't think we'll get there within our lifetime or whatever it is, or maybe it will never work, so we should just stop acting. That has got to be one of the most noxious things that we can all believe in. And I know it's really hard to not feel that way. I struggle with that every day. But the reality is that like the only thing that we can do is put one foot after the other towards the future that we want. And if we get into a scenario saying, "Oh, you're right, like better throw in the towel, like I'll just do what I can and stay in my little corner," that's how we got to where we are, right? That's how we got to the scenario of this is unsolvable, this is infixable, and this is ties to the earlier question of like, "Oh, I can't fix that." Yes, you can. Believe in your agency to do one little thing differently in your life. Even if it's not coffee, pick one thing to say that I don't like that. I want to find some way to answer that, and I can be part of that change. Even if I die and there's three people that come, three generations down, and like that affects them in some trickle down way that like I didn't expect was going to happen, but like it did, you would have won, you know? Even if I think this every time I get in a plane, like it's like when the plane crashes, since there's so many of them these days, I'm pretty satisfied because like, Semilla is not anything's big. It's not anything really special. But I never believed 10 years ago that I could start a business that would positively affect the lives of 70 to 75 families in eight or four different countries, like, and that's a lot, and I think that having that belief that you can do something is key, and believing like getting too sucked into pessimism is part of the power structure that keeps us in a scenario where we wait for someone else to make the change. And as we've been talking about for the last while, waiting for that change, we're going to watch the whole thing degrade before that happens.
And I think you've got some empirical evidence there, my friend, that Semilla is actually a very important business. It really has made the kind of impact that we should all hope to be able to make in the world. Affecting the lives of 75 families is no small feat. And I think you should be really proud of it. Brendan, this has been a really special series for me. Thank you very much. I think there's a lot of people out there that are, as I said at the beginning of this episode, that are going to listen to this episode and think, what the fuck just happened? I feel very different about the way that I look at coffee. And I hope people reach out to you. I hope people start looking at Semilla and saying, okay, I now have empirical evidence that this guy is the guy I should be working with. And to be very clear, guys, we have no financial arrangement. I've never worked with Semilla. None of my clients work with Semilla. Nothing. He's just a guy I happened to see. The algorithm showed me your content, and I'm like, who the fuck is this? And I'm like, this is really interesting. And I have kind of waited for all the content to drop every time since then. So thank you for what you do. I think it's a really valuable thing that you're doing for our industry. And I know thank yous don't really, pay the bills or, do very much, but know that you are seen and know that you are appreciated in our industry, and know that you serve as a light to people who have lost hope, that if you're an example of somebody that does it, and you openly talking about the fact that it's a struggle, we're all struggling right now. Everyone's struggling. So to see that you're struggling and you're still doing this a way that you can have pride for, and there is integrity in it, and you're demonstrating it, it means the world to the people who are in your ecosystem. So having said that, when the future version of you comes back and watches this, what do you hope for him?
I think that I hope that that he can look back at somebody who really didn't give up, I guess, and can see somebody who valued, like, that the value of what they created ended up in a place that made sense for more people, And I think that the hope for me is always, like you said, just being more of a symbol and a light, right? I don't think that what we do is existing to change the system, revolutionize the system. We exist to say you can, and we can. And so I think that my future self can look back and say that worked, and that inspired more people to be involved in a world that was more just and kind and intentional, and that it took the agency that it could to make that change.
Someone who spent 9 years building this Mapper Forward, 1,400 episodes in, I can really resonate with what you just said.
Yeah.
The intention of this podcast was, I'm not proud of who we are as an industry, and I'm going to build something that we're going to give away to people for free every day.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's going to make this industry better somehow.
100%. Yeah.
So I really resonate with what you're saying. You're a very special person in our industry, and I hope that more people see that. So thank you for what you do. Yeah. Tell people where they can find out more about Semilla.
Yeah, you can always find us on Instagram, Semilla Coffee, at Semilla Coffee on Instagram. Our website is semilla.ca. Semilla is spelled Semilla. That's seed in Spanish. Those are the two main places. I'm trying to be a LinkedIn person, so you can find me personally on LinkedIn or follow. Mostly,
don't do it to yourself, mate.
Things like we talk about, because I feel like the people who really need to hear it might be over there, actually. So you can be my lonely LinkedIn friend if you want.
Perfect. We will have links for everything in the show notes. Brendan, there's only one thing left to do. Will you do me the honor of signing us off for this series?
Of course. Thank you so much, and peace, love, and peanut butter.
Have an amazing rest of your day, everyone. Bye. This episode is part of a 5-part series produced by Mapper Forward. Check the full playlist and guest details in the show notes, as well as how you can support our work in the coffee industry. Become a premium YouTube subscriber, explore our Patreon and any brands we've partnered with to bring you this podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us grow our audience.